Alrighty. And away we go. Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Paul C. Hemis. Paul, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing quite well. Glad to be on the show.
Dude, I am so excited to have you. But before we talk about the reason that you're here, Paul, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. Paul is an accomplished producer, director, and writer with over 25 years of experience in the film industry. Known for his flexibility, creativity, and intuition, you have learned how to tackle big budget films and small independent productions alike. Now, my big question is, which would, if you're gun to your head, you got to choose. You're working on a big budget film or a small independent production. What are you choosing?
Honestly, with where I would want to come down is probably like in the mid range. If
Okay.
you get too big, then there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
But if it's too small, then you end up having to make compromises that are not always in the project's best interest. So having enough size, enough crew, enough financial resource to kind of get the job done efficiently, but not so much that you can afford to waste, because that's a mindset that kills you.
Hmm.
To be able to do things efficiently and on time and kind of moving stuff along, that's the sweet spot. And I think that helps with the creative process too, because you're not so flexible that we'll just write a check for everything, but you're flexible enough to actually do what it is you need to do to get the product done.
Sure. And, it's amazing because when things like that happen, especially on a small independent, you are known as a jack of all trades. You are like a crisis prevention guy. You're able to kind of zig and zag when a lot of people aren't able to make those moves. Now, does that just come with the experience, or is that something you've always kind of been known for in the industry?
Yeah, I've always been known for that. Basically, just in any facet of my life, the jack of all trades thing kind of stuck to me very early, and part of that is because I'm kind of curious about a lot of things, so I want to know how everything runs. I just was involved with a project where we had some VFX issues, and so I ended up having to kind of come up with my own visual effects technique to actually address that. So I became kind of the visual effects guy, even though I wasn't hired on for that role initially.
Right.
But I knew enough about VFX, and I'd had enough experience to call myself competent at it. And the rest of it is kind of like you watch a lot of YouTube videos, and you kind of read a lot of what other people have written, and you get to a place where you can kind of create your own process because you're experienced enough in enough areas to piece it all together into a puzzle.
Sure. And right now, actually, you are on the film circuit right now, on the film festival circuit. I mean, I'm sorry. Now, what film do you have out there right now, and when are people going to be able to check it out?
Okay. Well, we have one that's just wrapping up now, but the one that's coming out, we've begun that process, and some of the early feedback is very good. Is a film that I made. It is a very low budget film, but it was kind of a passion project that I wanted to make. It's called Maya, and it's about a female Grim Reaper. And I did vast majority of everything kind of on that. Like I said, this was kind of, how in Hollywood they have the make one for you, make one for me kind of thing. This
Yep.
was the make one for me kind of thing. This was I wanted to do something fun and experiment, and also play in some different spheres of filmmaking that I hadn't really gotten enough exposure to, and so this was an opportunity to do that. But I think having that under the belt then makes me a better filmmaker when I do jump on, as I did, onto another project, because then I can jump in where the unexpected takes you.
Sure. And now, Maya, you said that this was kind of like your baby. Is this something that you wrote and directed as well, or was this something that?
I wrote, produced, directed, edited it. Yes, I'm
Awesome.
kind of all over it. Visual effects, I was supervisor on, did a lot of it. I even wrote the theme song of it. I dabbled in music over the years, and this was kind of, I wanted to just kind of use those muscles again. I hadn't done it in such a long time, and it was fun. I had for time, I had a friend kind of help me with the recording part of it, but I wrote the song, and it's a fun kind of feather in the cap that, okay, I even did that.
Right. Right. You start calling yourself Paul Hemis Carpenter now.
Yeah.
Um, so no, it's always
Well,
amazing, like I said, when you can build these things. Like I'm with you. Like if you watch my intro to these videos, you watch the outro to these videos. I did all that. I've always loved music, always been a huge music fan. So um I feel like that type of, it's all entertainment. And when you're an entertainer and you like to entertain people, you want to dabble into as many of those aspects as possible. So, and I see you got is that a Fender back there?
yes, my white Stratocaster.
Yeah.
That's actually from I was a big Vaughan Brothers fan, and this was Stevie Ray did his thing.
You're right.
Vaughan had the white Strat with the fabulous Thunderbirds, and I loved them both, but Jimmy was just kind of subtly cool,
Yeah.
and so I wanted the white Strat, and I've had it ever since. So
That's awesome, man. I could see the headstock in the background and I was over here admiring it the whole time.
yeah.
Um, well, I mean, and now obviously I want everybody else to know. You always know that I do this, but I have all of Paul's links, social media down in the description. So make sure that you are following him so you can stay up to date on Maya, but not just that, but everything else that he has coming out in the future. That way you could be a part of it and check it out. And maybe I'm very excited for you guys to be able to see Maya. It's something that I feel like, especially with a passion project like this, and having a female death, what's cooler than that? So I can't wait for you guys to check that out as well. So make sure you are following Paul on social media to stay up to date on all these things he has coming up. So now, in order for you to make horror films and be in that type of business, horror had to start for you somewhere, Paul. So now I would like to go back to the past and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Paul, the first horror movie you watched was
It's hard to really pinpoint what the first one was because I was always into horror forever, and my
Mhm.
parents were very supportive of anything that I wanted to do with the movies. I have very clear recollections of being like 4, 5, 6 years old, already explaining to my parents how scenes were blocked and some of the kind of practical effects were done. And so they never had any problem kind of sneaking me into R-rated stuff and things like that. So I got to see everything, and there was a lot of stuff kind of in the theaters at that time, and then a little bit later the VHS era kind of hit, and so I saw literally everything. The ones that were kind of strangely kind of important to me. First one was called Squirm. It was actually, my parents took me to a drive-in, and there was a double feature of a film called Tentacles, which was kind of a cheap Italian Jaws ripoff with Shelley Winters, and
Mhm.
it had like an all-star cast and all. It was a squid movie, and it's fine. It's fine. I have a copy of it somewhere around here. But the second feature, and it was a drive-in, so my parents, they weren't quite as savvy as to how the drive-in worked, where you had the Hollywood-ish film on the A film, and then there was a throw in on, on the back end of it, a B film. And the B film was Squirm, this little low budget thing about killer worms that got electrified after a storm. Power line went down in Georgia, and it activated the worms, and the worms started attacking the locals.
Mhm.
And it was really kind of atmospheric and not excessively gory, but just gory enough to kind of get the squeamish to kind of, and of course it's worms, so people are kind of weirded out right off the bat. And
Always, whenever I think of Squirm, I think of that shower scene where you see them coming out of the shower head and then
yes,
sucking back in before she could see. Like that's a scene that I've always stuck with me from Squirm, man.
yeah, the shower is one. The worm face where the guy originally gets attacked by the worms on the boat, and they kind of bore into his face. That's, yeah.
Yes.
And then the whole last 10 minutes or whatever, where just the house is flooded with them, is just, it's classic. But I just remember loving the film, and my parents were horrified. They thought maybe they overshot the runway, and they wanted to take me to see a Herbie movie the next night, which was just horrible. I didn't want to see that. But I loved being in the theater because I'm watching. I'm just grinning from ear to ear on how this is, and I see what they're doing with the actually making the film. It's like, to me, it was always like magic. I saw it
Yeah.
as, they're putting on a magic show for us. And so I never got intimidated by horror films as a kid, but I am watching the reaction of the people in the other cars. And these are grown men and women screaming, and the popcorn's flying out of their hands and things like that. And I'm thinking, this is amazing. You don't get that with a drama. You don't get that with other types of filmmaking. With
Right.
genre films, especially horror films, you have the potential to kind of play and manipulate the audience in a way that's just wonderful. I just think it's a lot of fun.
Hmm. And
And
Squirm is one of those movies that, like I said, I'm a big fan of it. So it's a movie that I could talk about. Now, is that the one that you would say was your first horror movie?
that's the first probably adult-ish horror movie. Around the same time, I did see another film that was on HBO called The Boogans, and that was another one that was kind of important to me. In that I saw it on HBO and I loved it. It was a low-budget monster movie about basically they call it The Boogans. It's a bunch of monsters running around caves in mines in Utah, and all the mines lead under the town, and so the boogans are kind of crawling around underneath the town attacking people, and nobody and at the end of it, you finally get to see the boogan. It's one boogan because they can only afford one boogan, but it's I love the film because it was really atmospheric and really I love the low budget film because I got the sense that I knew what they were doing. Even as a kid, I knew what they were doing, and that was I loved that movie. And then it disappeared after HBO stopped running it. It kind of vaporized. I had no idea where the thing went. It was early days of VHS even, and so it was late coming to that show as well. So the only place that I saw a reference to it was on an episode of Newhart, the Bob Newhart follow-up show with Peter Scolari kind of, oh, Steph the Boogans is on TV tonight. And he's getting all excited. So, oh, God, I didn't imagine it. It actually exists.
Right.
A few years after that, then it finally came out on VHS, and I love it, and I've got like 40 copies of the poster around here and such. It's just I still love it.
That's awesome, man. So, we know that what you watched both of these at quite a young age, but which of these two movies would you say was the one that affected you the most?
Squirm,
Gorm.
Squirm,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, Squirm definitely because of the kind of the intimacy of that film. I liked the atmosphere of it. It didn't overdo the gore. The Boogans had a
Mhm.
couple of scenes that were a little bit more. I'm not. I don't think gore necessarily. There's a time and a place for it, and Maya has a couple of scenes where we have some gore, a couple of pretty grisly scenes, but I don't. I feel it's kind of a crutch for filmmakers. It's not necessary all the time. So if you do nothing but show gore, eventually it's like we're bored. We've seen it. So I
Yeah.
like to pepper my films with a little of multiple things to kind of keep it interesting. So when the gore finally comes, it has some shock value to you.
Right. It actually has a reason to be there.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny because you talk about, like, even with Squirm, like, when you think about the idea of killer worms, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, I'll give you that. But when you're watching this movie, it is such a fun movie. But I can imagine as a child being terrified of this movie. So, do you remember which scene it was that affected you the most from Squirm?
Oh yeah. There's a scene where Don's I forgot the actor's name, but um, the lead actor kind of is trying to hide from one of the locals because he's sneaking around his yard or so. And kind of sneaks in the back of a van or truck or something like that. And there's a skeleton, a body that had been completely kind of removed of all flesh from the worms. And he's kind of, you can see it with the flashlight. And it's just him kind of cowering with the skeleton in the scene. And it
Yeah.
was just really minimalist and very basic and very scary.
Yeah.
It just, you didn't have to have kind of crazy effects and jump. It's just a guy in a skeleton. If you frame it and time it right, it's still very scary. And even now I look at that scene and it's like, it works. It really does.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's one of those things where, sometimes less is more. Leave it up to our imagination. We don't got to watch the guy get torn to pieces. We don't have to watch all the flesh get eaten off his body, but we know what happened. And
Sure.
especially when he's there in that scene, we know what's happened. And like you said, when you have just that little bit of a shock value of just seeing it right in your face. I mean, I haven't seen Squirm in so long, but it's one of those movies that there's certain scenes I'll always remember from this film. And now, obviously, in Hollywood, remakes, requels, sequels, kind of all the rage. Would you like to see Squirm remade today or a requel type thing done today?
No, I don't think I'm not a supporter of remakes of films that worked the first time. There's so much other material out there, films that probably were victims of their budget or their time that I'd rather see remakes of. I liked the remake of like the Crazies because nobody remembered the original Crazies,
Yeah.
and they were able to upgrade it to where it's like, oh, this is a really kind of good film. So I'm kind of I'm not a big supporter of remakes for the sake of remakes. There really
Yeah,
should be a point to it, you know.
sure. And the reason I'm so anti the remake of Squirm, because this is one of the, there's very few films where I'm like, no, don't do it. I don't think they would keep it practical. And Squirm was 100% practical, and you can
Yeah.
tell, and it looks awesome. Like
Oh,
it
that
looks so good.
again, the ending where it's just a sea of worms in the house. If you go digital with that, it's like, oh God, I don't even want to think about that. That
Yes,
that I would
exactly.
lose sleep over, you know, that I'd lose.
Yeah, it's scary for a different reason.
Yeah,
Um, so we talked about the was it Boogans? Is that how you say it?
the Boogans,
The
the Boogans
Boogans.
is great.
We
Boogans
talked
was
about what was that?
No, I was gonna say the Boogans is one of those early examples of it had all the great horror film tropes of the early 80s. It had the you're doomed guy and things like that, for no reason just walking around town telling everybody you're doomed if you do that, you know. And it's like this was kind of a fun era where I'm starting to pick up on these trends. You know, you see the old guy from the Boogans, the you're doomed guy is the same type of character as from Friday the 13th. This from, you know, they're just on and on and on, and I loved those formula elements. I'm actually a big fan of horror formulas, but I think understand the formula, try to be respectful of the audience and kind of addressing the formula, but then kind of give them a little something. There's still a lot of creative play within the formula, but I think when sometimes people kind of say, well, it's not really a horror film, well, I think you just kind of you don't be making horror films then.
Yeah,
If you don't love horror films, don't make horror films.
that's exactly it. You got to do it. Like horror is one of the things. It's not like a Marvel movie where you get a $500 million budget and you can go do. If you're doing a horror film, you need to do it for the passion and the love of the genre. I completely agree with you because you could tell when something's phoned in. I'm looking at you, Nightmare on Elm Street remake. You could tell that the people didn't want to be there. They didn't give a shit about what they were working on, and that sucks. When you have something like that, that just sucks, man. When it's a cash grab, never works in horror.
Yep.
So we know what these movies did to you and how they affected you. But now, Paul, I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball here at you for a second. My little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite scary movie, Paul? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Oh, that is a curveball. Wow, it's couldn't ask me like a simple question like what's the meaning of life or something like that.
Right.
You got to
See,
give
and
me
it's
what's
funny
my
'cause
favorite horror film.
of all the questions I tell people I'm going to ask, I never tell anybody that I'm going to ask them this question because I want a genuine response. I don't want you to think on it. I want it seat of your pants, boom.
And the immediate response is the Evil Dead 2. And I'm sure that others have answered kind of in that same vein. Evil Dead 2 is the perfect balance of horror and comedic elements, and everything works about it. And it's not so big budget that it feels kind of controlled. This was Sam Raimi doing his thing. It was very influential on me because Sam Raimi was one of those guys who kind of did his own thing. I
Yeah.
point this out to others. He was really one of the first guys to start doing like point of view shots of inanimate objects and things like
Mhm.
that. It's like, why would a knife flying through the air have a point of view? Why? Because that's the world we're creating. We understand the film rules, but as long as we're consistent in violating those rules, then it
Yeah.
still works because we've created our own universe. You know, and
Evil
so he was a
Dead.
good guy for that.
Well, Evil Dead as a franchise is amazing.
Yeah.
I think the whole Evil Dead franchise. I even like the reboot, the 2013 reboot. I'm very excited for Evil Dead Rise, but Evil Dead 2 will always be my favorite in that franchise. I think that movie is in the top three sequels of all time, in my opinion. I think that it's hilarious. I think it's scary. As a kid, it always freaked me out when you have Ash coming out of the mirror and he's like, "We just chopped up our girlfriend. Does that sound fine to you?" Like that always scared me as a kid, man. And I'm still a huge fan. Now, as an Evil Dead fan, I gotta ask you, have you ever gone to see the Evil Dead musical?
I have not. It's something that's kind of on my curiosity list, but I have not as of now.
I cannot recommend it enough, man. The only thing I could say is if you get tickets, get there early and sit in the splatter zone. That's all I'm going
Oh,
to tell you, man. You will
absolutely.
not regret it. It is it. My wife took me for our 15-year anniversary, and it was the coolest shit I've ever done, man. I can't recommend it enough. So
Hey,
Um,
interesting Evil Dead story. I was a projectionist when the Army of Darkness came out.
yeah,
And it was back when we actually had films, not DCPs and all that. So the reels would come in, and I'd have to splice the reels together, and then I'd have to run it once before the paying audience got in there, just to make sure I didn't put a reel on backwards or something like that. And so I
uh,
got to see all the films the night before they actually released. And I talked to everybody that was working in the theater. We got Army of Darkness starting. Yeah, you got to watch this film. This is because I knew this was the third Evil Dead film, and so you got to see this thing. So I had everybody staying up till about 2 in the morning or something like that watching this. And when it was over, they all looked at me. And it's like, what did I just see? No, nobody got it. Nobody got it. They were all looking at me like, what? We're not listening to you anymore. But now, fast forward to all these years later, it's like a classic, and it's had like 400 video releases, and it's generally, what is it, like 80% on Rotten Tomatoes or something. It's like
yeah.
the audience caught up to it, but at that initial reaction was just hilarious. It's like they were just physically angry with me.
But like again, I would say Army of Darkness is probably my least favorite in that franchise. But
Mm.
what I will say is it's the one I've quoted the most. I absolutely adore it. Like I love the movie.
Yeah,
But
it,
I mean,
it's it veered further away from the horror elements toward the comedy elements, and so
yes.
the people that have a problem with it kind of have a problem with it on that
Mhm.
level, but they still, like you said, respect it for being kind of a unique piece unto it. So there's really, you look at Army of Darkness, what other film is like that? There's not a lot,
Right.
and
Well, I
so
mean,
that's what I like about those.
and me, I'm a Detroit boy.
Yeah.
Trying to show you my tattoo. So all the
Yeah.
Dearborn, Michigan references and shop smart, shop S smart. This is my boomstick. Like that stuff. Man, like I absolutely love. And again, I love Army of Darkness. When I tell people it's my least favorite, they're like, "Seriously?" I'm like, "Dude, I also have a least favorite song on the Beatles' White Album. It doesn't mean the song's
Yeah,
not
there,
fucking
there has
great."
to be a least favorite everything, right?
Right. So, man, Paul, I've had an amazing time with you talking about your first horror movie, your favorite horror movie. But what I want to do now before I let you go, I want to bounce back to Squirm. And what we're going to do here is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not judging Squirm on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. What we're doing here is strictly ranking Squirm on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, zero skulls being not effective, five being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Paul, what would your ranking of Squirm be?
Oh, that's clearly a five. I was a different person after seeing that. Literally, if my parents had taken me to see Herbie the day before, I probably would have been fine with it. I had no interest in Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo or what it was after seeing Squirm. None.
Well, and what I love about this, and the reason I love to talk to people about their first horror movie is just me as a human being. I don't remember my first drama. I don't remember my first comedy. I don't remember my first action. I remember seeing House 1986 sitting on my grandma's floor eating a plate of pizza rolls. I remember that shit perfect. I
Mhm.
remember Big Ben coming in the house with the little boy, like, look, Roger. I remember that shit. I'm like, oh, damn. And so, like, that's why horror, once you get it, to me, it's like a drug. And you get it and you're constantly chasing that dragon after that. You're constantly trying to get that high again with more horror movies. And it's more than just movies to me. Like it really is a passion and it's something
It,
I just very much love and enjoy.
it's even more than that. It's a community, in that there is a relationship between the audience and even the actors and filmmakers that make
Yeah.
these films. You go to some of these events, Mad Monster and other kind of horror shows and things like that. People genuinely love I mean, Bruce Campbell. I mean, people would take a bullet for Bruce Campbell who never met him.
Right.
Lynn Shay, who had a very productive career prior to making horror films, she's the horror fans have kind of, we want her. She's in our camp. We
She's
want.
ours now.
She's ours now. Yeah. So it's a unique situation. You don't see that like, again, in dramas. Not to be picking on dramas, but you just don't have that relationship with that type of film as you do with these genre films.
Exactly. You don't get rom-com con. You don't get people, waiting 3 days to dress up like Ryan Gosling and go in and be like, if you're a bird, I'm a bird. You don't get that stuff.
Right.
And that's what horror means to us. Like I'm meeting Bruce in March, like or this month I'm meeting Bruce and I'm super, super stoked on it. It's first time I've ever met him. Every time we've had like I was gonna meet him last year. and he
Mhm.
ended up having a filming conflict, so we couldn't meet up. And now I'm actually going to meet him this year, and I'm very excited about that. It's something that a long time coming. So I do want to remind everybody, I do have all of Paul's social media links down in the description. So make sure that you're following him to stay up to date on everything he has coming up here in the future. Paul, don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
Everybody else, as always, if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe. It really does help the channel a lot. Make sure you follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media as well. We'd love to have you along. And until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.